Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the prospect of Nigel Farage and Reform UK benefiting from the electoral reform promised by Labour in the form of votes for 16 and 17-year-olds, because this seems to be a bit of a topic that's bouncing around. I've been asked about it directly myself, and now I see an article in Politico talking about it as well as a few other articles about. However, there is a strong element of mainstream media doing what it does and presenting what sounds like shocking headlines and then making them look vaguely ridiculous in the article. It's worth considering, though, because people are going to be understandably keen to consider the future trajectory of Reform UK. People say that Nigel Farage is the single most influential politician in Britain of the past decade. I think it's probably a toss-up between him and Boris Johnson. They've each pushed our country down a terrible path in a way you wouldn't imagine anyone else being able to manage. But Johnson is gone. He's living in a very expensive hedge now. But Farage is not only still around, but now is in Parliament with his band of very grumpy millionaires and their angry racist mascot in tow. Will they use this new platform to persuade the country to throw itself deeper into the abyss? Or does it help shine a spotlight on his lies and hate? So what we're doing is we're trying to think to ourselves, what's the trajectory over this Parliament? What are their prospects at the next election? And part of that discussion is understanding who Farage appeals to and why. So with respect 16 and 17-year-olds who will be voting at the next general election, let's start with the obvious. The basis for this idea that Reform UK could benefit from 16 and 17-year-olds getting the vote is a poll from JL Partners. Now, more about those in a bit, but for now, this latest poll seems to suggest that 23% of 16 to 17-year-olds would vote for Reform UK. And some people are going, oh, well, that's more than the overall across all age groups. So that's a good thing for Reform UK. Now, because I cast doubt on the validity of the figure, so let's first of all assume that it is true. The figures break down like this. Labour get 39%, Reform 23%, the Greens 9%, Conservatives on 5%. And Reform are particularly attracting the male vote to produce this figure, which actually that does make sense. But for a moment, let's assume this figure is accurate. Now, obviously, this is a national figure. What matters would be the breakdown in marginal constituencies where Reform UK are challenging. But the other thing that matters is that in a first-past-the-post system, it doesn't matter how many votes you get, only how many in comparison to your rivals. And this poll only looks extraordinary because it shows a potential pool of voters supporting Reform UK with significantly more than the percentage of the vote they got nationally. That's it. However, with first past the post, this only helps Reform UK in constituencies where they're battling with the Tories. But in any constituency where they're battling with the Tories, focusing on the youth vote anyway is going to make it look bad for the Tories, right? And although many of this, well, in fact, most of the seats that Reform UK actually won were by taking them off Tory candidates, sure, that's not the case in terms of their overall portfolio of targets. If you think about all the seats that people thought they might have won and then didn't, they were actually against Labour. So at the next election, if they want to boost their numbers in Parliament, they're going to need to take Labour on. And if they get a new pool of voters entering the electorate and they can get 23% of their votes, you go, oh, that's good. But if Labour are getting 39% of them, Labour are extending their lead over Reform UK. Labour are having an easier job beating Reform UK. In other words, this poll, if reflected across key constituencies, would be net bad for Reform UK, not net good. But like I say, the national picture isn't much use. You may well suppose that this age group would support Reform UK more strongly in those left behind former industrial towns where immigration is often blamed for the ravages of billionaires. However, there are a few other things to consider as well. First of all, voting participation tends to be proportional to age. In other words, young people don't vote in large enough numbers. Now, I would like to think that the lower voting age will generate a little bit of hype and maybe get more people voting at the next election, but don't expect a sudden sea change. The other thing is there are only so many 16 and 17-year-olds, like even if they did vote in large numbers for their inaugural election, all hyped up for the change. There are only so many. But I would say by far the biggest reason to doubt that Farage would benefit from this policy is that the figures just don't seem reliable, like even close to it. First of all, the pollster is polling a population which is smaller than usual, which means the errors are more significant. But also one where there is no previous data in England. I mean, you try and get the average 16 or 17-year-old to take part in a poll about elections, how they're going to vote in an election where at the moment they're not legally allowed to vote, right? Throughout England, okay? There's only going to be so many 16, 17-year-olds even want to take part in such a poll. So you naturally skew it towards people who have very firm political beliefs and are therefore more attracted to parties who are sort of more extreme, shall we say. And also there's no previous data in England to calibrate it with, which is, again, where Reform UK mostly casts its net anyway. So that calibration is going to be very, very hit and miss. We also need to consider if you are polling 16 and 17-year-olds now, they're going to be in their 20s by the election. So the 16 and 17-year-olds now, regardless of any change to the law, are going to be able to vote in the next general election. The people who are going to be in that age group at the next election are not quite in their teens now. Finally, the pollster in question, not terrible by any means, but they haven't earned any accolades with its polling, well, ever. Certainly not at this election. When the dust settled and the pollsters were ranked based on their pre-election polling and the final result, jail partners were very far from the worst, don't get me wrong, very far from the worst, but they were nowhere near the best either. YouGov were the best on MRPs, varying for the voting intention polls. You'd also have to consider that one of the main reasons people are attracted to a party like Reform UK, it stands on a platform of arguing for fundamental change to a lot of the way we do things. In other words, like, including the name, I suppose, fundamentally reforming the whole country, as opposed to just, well, let's just change this bit and change this bit and get better results, right? Now, that appeals to younger voters, but it works on the basis that fundamental change is needed because the current system is so clearly broken beyond repair. Well, do you know what? For young people after 14 years of a Tory government, it is. But after a few years of a Labour government, things will have improved significantly for young people. The systems that are still likely to look like they need massive rethinks will be more along the lines of the really massive global stuff, climate change, capitalism. Reform UK do not distinguish themselves from the Tories in those regards. So the Green Party can potentially try to retain and build on support amongst the young for fundamental reforms on some of these progressive issues. I think Reform UK are going to struggle. It's not that they won't be able to make the same arguments. Labour aren't going to turn things around like magic in just 4 or 5 years, but they will have moved away from the level of catastrophe. It'll have been dialed down that Reform UK are in the habit of pointing at when arguing for their policies. And speaking of the Green Party, I'd certainly treat with suspicion any poll that says only 9% of 16 and 17-year-olds would vote for them. Like, that is matching their national share across all age groups from last month. That seems a little low to be believed without a lot of questions being asked. And like I say, 16 and 17-year-olds at the next election are currently only about to become teenagers. If their prospects are looking a lot brighter than the current 16, 17-year-old crop, then Reform UK will have way less appeal. And that's without even considering that Reform UK may still implode under pressure from the scrutiny they're getting now that they're in Parliament and representing a material threat to the Conservatives. Because we know the Tory client media will like to push a lot of Reform UK's policies, absolutely. But some of them don't like them nicking Tory votes in doing so and helping Labour stay in power. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.